As a photographer, all you really need is a camera, which is a huge problem actually. The whole point of going into a creative field is that you don't want to live somebody else's life. At precisely the wrong moment, a beer can zipped by my ear. Everything is different and is always changing. I'm so aware of how people react to cameras and to lenses in their face. Animation or video games or character and people and persona and why people behave the way they behave. Because at the end of the day, you want to just take a picture of a human being. My name is Ted Belton, and I am a photographer and sometimes an illustrator, but mostly I just take pictures. It was really a variety of things, and when I think back on it now, it makes perfect sense that I sort of have ended up doing exactly what I'm doing. But I was an actor when I was a kid. I mean, I was certain actually that that's what I was going to do. My life's purpose was going to be an actor on the stage or whatever. Acting for me was sort of about an exploration of character and people and persona and why people behave the way they behave. So I acted up until I was 18 or 19, and during that time I also had always drawn, and I thought maybe going to film school might be a combination of those two things and allow me to, use all parts of my interest and talent. But I think it was in film school that I really realized I didn't love the very, very, very collaborative nature of working in film. Way too many people involved. Any ideas had to be vetted by so many different people to get to the conclusion. Playing video games as a kid really influenced or sort of pushed me toward, again, this idea of character or costume design or character design. And I had a lot of friends who worked in animation or video games or things like that. And so I was very influenced by them and paying a lot of attention to how people are composed. So I think when I think back on it now, it makes a lot of sense that I ended up doing basically fashion photography. When I first realized that fashion was going to be the sort of the area that I was going to be able to be most creative in and that I might be able to sort of thrive in, I totally dove into like the history of sort of 20th century fashion photography. And I mean, you can see it in my work. Like early on, there's a huge influence from that sort of mid-century Vogue moment. Basically read every book and learned everything I could about Avedon and Penn. And I was looking at the photography, but I was also really looking at the live. What did Richard Avedon eat for breakfast? What did people think of him? What were their social lives like? How did they dress? It's the weirdest thing, but it probably comes back to that actor thing. The truth is, now I think it's everything outside of the frame, everything outside of the picture, and that can mean the series of events that brought me to the moment that I'm photographing, or it can be the people that are in the room around me. It can be the history of the clothes that the model is wearing, or it can be what everybody else is wearing on set, or what we had for lunch, or the jokes we were making before we all got to work. And what does it mean to work in jeans rather than in tailored trousers? It's such a strange thing, but all of those things were very, very, very interesting to me. And then I would go out and buy the camera that they use, not necessarily because I was trying to achieve the same picture, but I wanted to feel physically the motions that they went through and the limitations that they had. I'm not even that interested in taking pictures, actually. I don't even think that's the drive for me. I very rarely have an image in my head that needs to be made. It's really more about going through the exercise of understanding how a picture is made, and that has very much been my focus for the past, I would say, 5 years. I don't know, there's something about context that is so much more interesting than the actual sort of subject matter. And I guess the simplest answer is I really just try to stay very open and stay very informed and anything that interests me, I sort of follow it to its end. My great sort of ambition in life, the only thing that keeps me going as a photographer or as an artist or whatever, is really just hoping that I might encounter some true moment of style, And those are the kind of people that I love to photograph, and people to whom their style comes really naturally, or maybe it is the result of a lifetime of effort and accumulating their style. But the question I get a lot from students is, how do you develop like your style? And it sounds like such a silly thing to say, but you really don't develop a style. A style is really everything you can't not do. You know, it's all the mistakes you always make, and it's all the sort of instinctual things that you just somehow can't get away from. But I think learning to embrace those things is basically the first 10 years. Or maybe I'll just speak for myself. That seems to be how long it's taken me. Basically to understand that all the things you think are obvious and you think are too easy are probably the things that you should be doing. As soon as you sort of open yourself up to, learn to trust your instincts, which is something that people say, like it's such a maxim, right? And you don't really know what it means when you're growing up, probably because you can't differentiate your instincts from what, you're being told is the right thing to do. And I think style is really just about getting older and understanding the things that are really central to your perspective, because that's all you have to work with, and learning to trust those instincts all the way to their sort of furthest limit, which is the hardest thing to do, because there's constantly things coming in and out of life trying to push you in one way or the other. In the creative industries, there's always somebody with an opinion, there's always somebody who doesn't understand what you're trying to do, and oftentimes nobody does understand until it's done, and then they all go, oh yeah, that's great. Style. It occurs naturally, but it has to be, what's the word? Nurtured, because I think it can evaporate very easily. It's really about the process, and the picture is always going to look like the experience you had making it. So for me, the process of shooting film has everything to do with the effect that it has on everybody else that's there, even if it's just me and the subject, or if it's me and a team of people standing over my shoulder. Film is great because it immediately, it's like magic. Everybody just goes away. Like if you're working with a stylist or makeup artist or art director or whatever, as soon as you start shooting on film, they just know that they have no part in this transaction. Like it's none of their business anymore, because there's no tether, and they don't understand how the camera works. So that's, in my opinion, most of the time how it should be, especially for a portrait. People relax a lot more when you're shooting on film, maybe just because they know that the picture doesn't exist yet in a weird way. Whereas with digital, you can't help but look at the picture. And so the subject is watching you look at the picture, and then they're thinking they're being criticized. Like they know that you're looking at the picture going, maybe not. That can't be a comfortable experience, I think, for a lot of people. When you shoot on film, the only thing you have to pay attention to is the person that you're photographing. It's a slower process, and it's a more intentional process, and it just casts this air, for everybody there, that you have to take it more seriously, because everybody knows that it's $3 every time you crank that lever, and if you're there for 8 hours, that's just like cha-ching, that adds up. But then on the other side, certain times with certain subjects, the validation of digital can be an amazing tool. Just the fact that you can take 1,000 pictures a minute, I find it very validating for a lot of, especially models. They need to hear the lights go off, they need to hear the click of the shutter to know that they're doing something right. There's interesting technical things to both ways. And it's a very meditative thing to do when you only have, 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 pictures to a roll, and you walk around in the world looking for those pictures, and it changes the way that you look at things. The art of observation, it's very, very different walking around the world with a sketchbook in your hand versus with a camera, right? But if you see somebody walking down the street with a big professional camera, you're gonna go, well, what are they doing that they couldn't just have done it on their phone? I was in New York, and I had just a 35mm camera around my neck, and at precisely the wrong moment, I looked down to just adjust the aperture, because I noticed that the clouds were moving. So I had my hand on my camera, and I passed by these people, and I guess from their perspective, it looked like I had taken a picture of them, and I hadn't. I walked a few more steps, and then a beer can zipped by my ear. I made the mistake of looking back, and I made eye contact with this guy, and it was him and this woman. And as soon as he locked eyes with me, he made a beeline for me, and he just ran across the street. You motherfucker, I'm gonna fucking kill you, piece of shit. I took a picture of my girlfriend's ass, fucking you pervert. I don't know if you can use any of this, but, and he chased me for 2 or 3 blocks down Madison Avenue. In between high school and university, I was sort of in limbo, and I took a year off before I went to film school. Sort of all my friends at the time ended up being animators and illustrators, and I mean, I never studied, how to draw, but I learned a lot at that time from these people, all of whom were, professional artists working at a very high level, and we used to go subway sketching every Sunday. And I think I did this for 2 or 3 years. We would meet up and just sit on the subway for 2 or 3 hours and draw people. I'd never done that before. I'd never drawn from life before. I was always just drawing from my imagination. There's a different way of looking at value and looking at contrast and looking at light when you're drawing, because it all kind of comes from scratch and you get to decide what's included and what's not. And like, for example, you become very aware of the fact that a face is not actually a collection of features, but it's like a collection of shadows. That's what actually defines a face in our brains, right? It's not light, but actually like the absence of light. So then, when you go back to taking pictures, you start to realize that what you're really just looking at is a combination of shadows. And during the pandemic, obviously, when the pandemic first started, it was the same situation where I was left at home with nothing to do, and so of course I ended up drawing all year, all of 2020, and I really picked it up in a way that I hadn't in almost a decade, and now it's become a really important part of my practice, just as a way of sort of getting ideas onto paper and then experimenting with silhouettes. And I don't know, it's also just a great way to like not think about anything.